In this chapter, we'll be discussing about GDP growth rate. That's a very important topic. So we will see in a later chapter what is exactly meant by GDP and GNP. But you have to know the GDP figure, especially the prevailing GDP growth rate. Okay. So India's GDP as on 2016 is $2.264 trillion. So large economies are US, whose GDP is 18.57 trillion, China 11.2 trillion. So you have to remember what is the GDP of India. It's 2.264 trillion. Please update with the latest figures. You can Google it. So you should know more than the GDP absolute figure. You should know the growth rate. That is very important. So that mentions that is an indicator of how well the economy is doing. Low growth rate, GDP growth rate means it's not good. High growth rate means economy is doing well. More jobs, general economic activity is good. Okay. So for 2016-17 year, the GDP growth rate was 7.1%, which actually is very good. Okay, compared to many other countries, it's very good. Also, not just annually, growth rate, GDP growth is also furnished every quarter. So for the latest period, that is the first quarter of 2017-18, that is the 3 months period, April 2017 to June 2017, GDP growth is 5.7%. That was actually the lowest for the past 3 years. That is believed to due to the effects of demonetization and GST. So here in this graph, you can see the GDP growth is over the years. You can see there were periods where GDP growth has even crossed 10%. Okay, but now it's around 7%. So one thing you should know is what is the GDP growth rate for the latest completed year. So like 2016-17 full year, you should know the GDP growth rate. You should also know the latest quarter GDP growth rate. Then you should also know what is the projected GDP growth rate. So that is an indication of the prospective rate. So what is the outlook of the economy? So there will be some agencies that will be predicting how the economy is going to perform during the coming year. So like IMF. So IMF projections for 2018 is like 7.7%. IMF later actually revised it downwards to 7.4%. So there will be other agencies also, like Asian Development Bank is projecting India's growth rate for 17-18 at just 7%. So this is also important. Okay, what are the various agencies? How are they projecting India's GDP growth rate? So that is an outlook of the economy. So the questions need to be prepared. What is the size of India's economy, or what is India's GDP? Which country has the highest GDP? That is US. What is China's GDP? Because it's a very close competitor for us, you should be knowing their GDP is around 11 trillion. What was India's GDP growth rate last year? That you should know. What was India's GDP growth rate during the last quarter? You should know. And what is the projected GDP for the coming year?